We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe. Today on Talking Joe Disavowed, we are continuing our look at the Disavowed Devil's Due era by talking to Sam Wells. Now, Sam Wells started as an intern at Devil's Due Publishing. I hope he did anyway. We'll ask him in a second. And he went on to be assistant publisher and has now gone on to run the toy shop, Toy du Jour, in Chicago. But I will not be talking to Sam alone. I will be joined, as always, by my co-host. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners and viewers. And let's bring in that guest.
Here he is. It's Sam. I've not done a song for him, but it's a soul man. It's Sam Wells.
Thanks. Wow. Awesome. Thanks. Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Welcome, Sam. Thank you for joining us.
Good to have you on. And I sort of a tick list of important Devil's Due creators and people that we need to have on Talking Joe as we're covering Devil's Due. So you were always on that list. It was just a question of when do we fit you in? And as we've been getting through America's Elite and been seeing your name more and more, particularly on those Data Desk handbook entries, I thought right. Now's the perfect time to bring you in and talk to you. So welcome.
Right on. Yeah. Thanks. What issue are you guys on right now?
We have just got to the end of, I think, 8, and we have just read through the first 2 special missions as well.
Sweet. Yeah. All right. I have my pile of books next to me, so I just kind of want to see where you guys are too. I haven't done
I did read ahead.
I have not read ahead, although I think I know how World War III ends. But I represent the fan who was not reading it at the time, and Mark represents the fan who did read it at the time but may have forgotten stuff. So the reread is fresh and exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've not read all the way ahead, just as far as getting Special Missions Brazil fresh in my mind.
Gotcha.
Just ahead of speaking to you.
Yeah. I did the reread I did recently was just the World War III trade paperback. I haven't brought myself to do the full reread yet, but I'm going to sync Talking Joe up with, I mean, that's what people want to do, right? Like, I'm currently doing the It's Always Sunny podcast and rewatching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia at the same time. So I'm excited to do that, the same thing on something that I was involved in. So that's exciting. You said number 8, right? You guys just did number 8? Yeah,
that's right.
That was my contribution right there. The I don't know if you see it on my crappy camera, the little tagline at the top. Yeah, and then there was one.
Nice.
Just zooming in.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about moving the sword from his hand in the full image to behind him in the zoomed in and cropped image? That became the cover.
So I don't, but I do have a story about those swords. So we were told by Hasbro to start incorporating the swords that another one of their licensors was selling at the time. And there's probably ads in all these books for those swords, the 2 Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow swords. I was pretty grumpy about it. Just having to shill doing product placement in our book. It doesn't matter to me now. It shouldn't have mattered to me then. But I actually have a printout of something I did. I didn't think I was going to get to this early. So it was bugging me that we were doing that, and I added this into an issue. I don't remember which issue, but I think it's fairly early on. So it's Duke there wearing his Mountain Dew uniform.
Sorry, I don't think I'm fully getting the joke or the reference.
Well, actually, it was I nicknamed him Mountain Duke. It was just one because of how extreme I thought the outfits were in America's Elite, but also just it was a mini protest about having to do product placement with the swords. It's really kind of hard to see, but like right above his right above his arms, you'll see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mountain Dew logo photoshopped in there. Like it was meant to be hard to find, and it was for the editorial staff. So yeah, I had to stop it pre-upload for approval.
That TV show that I worked on in 2001, people still haven't found all the Transformers that I hid in that one episode, and I'm waiting for the internet to let the rest of the internet know. But the show's pretty obscure, so the mystery continues.
So you had to match the swords because Hasbro had got a licensing deal for a company to make some sort of replica swords, but most of the other sort of characters and look of stuff, like the main Joes and stuff, that was a Devil's Due design. You didn't have to match to anything for that. So
for sure, yeah,
you're allowed.
Yeah, and if I remember the wording, about like including those swords, it didn't seem like there was anything written between that company and Hasbro, like forcing their comic publisher to include them. It just sounded like they were like, "Hey, we want to play nice," and we're like, "Okay, we'll throw them in there." And I was probably the only one that was like grumpy about it, like didn't want to sell out.
Sam, how many swords did Hasbro have the third-party company ship to Devil's Due, and how often were you and the other Devil's Due people running around the hallways, attacking each other with G.I. Joe prop swords?
Surprisingly, 0 swords. Hasbro was really good about sending us whatever Joe product was happening at the time that they were producing. And then we were lucky enough to be close friends with the Palisade guys that we would constantly get the Transformer and Joe statues. And I mean, actually, Palisades just sent us everything they were making because like we were doing the Micronauts comic at the same time that they were redoing the Micronauts toys. So we were getting those. We were getting all their Muppets stuff, which is still one of the best toy lines that's ever been produced. So like we would send them a monthly book package, just like here's all our books, and they would send us like here's a bunch of toys and statues and busts and
nice
stuff. We usually start. The first question we usually do is, "Where are you?" and tell us about your room. So, cool. Sam, are you at home or your store? And can you tell us a little bit about what is behind you? I don't recognize any of those objects.
Yeah, I am at home. I'm in Chicago. So I'm in the room that has no purpose whatsoever other than storing a bunch of crap that this stuff just eats up a whole room, and it's not super fun once it's all set up and you're basically done collecting. But this is where my vintage stuff is, and it's nonstop. That it's constant O-rings just giving out and dudes falling over, and it's I don't know, like 500 plus figures in the vintage line, and they just all get their own turn to like knock somebody else over and fall off the shelf. So yeah, that's fun.
The mint sealed stuff on your right, is that everything? Is that your favorites?
It's just what I had room for at the time. Like newer stuff that like I ran out of room now. Sorry, ran out of room up here. Stuff that I don't have room for just goes in the basement. Like or it gets piled up. I'll send you guys a photo of what the actual room looks like. Yeah, I'm gonna send real quick a shot of from over there what I'm sitting in, so you see what it actually looks like. But yeah, this is just a smattering of randomness. Yeah, it continues on as you can see in the photo, and I'm pretty sure that photo's okay to be shared. I don't think there's anything in there that I care about being public. I assume that's what a lot of people's Joe or toy room ends up looking like.
That worked.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So not normally doing podcasts in here, so there's not normally a TV tray and a random chair.
I'm seeing sort of both halves of this world. I'm seeing the stuff on display and also the piles of stuff or stuff in Tupperware bin.
Yeah. Stuff destined for the basement.
Cool.
I can see a whole heap of stuff. Looks like a Sergeant Savage. Is it a shampoo or bubble bath?
Yeah. Oh, he's hanging out right here, right? Little Sergeant Slaughter, right?
Yeah.
Eddie's disease.
Yeah.
Is that a prototype or vamp?
Oh yeah, it's a vamp. It's the
white one.
Yeah, I can't get to that one too easily. There's a bunch of loose figures on top. It was the prototype Hound, technically, from the crossover San Diego set, which was Yeah. So it was a project that we worked on.
Oh, from then, not from recently.
No, yeah. That was so this gets into a whole other story, but Devil's Due had another company that had started called Kunoichi that did a lot of creative services for Hasbro. And that company carried on after Devil's Due lost the license for Joe. We were still doing a lot of in-house stuff for Hasbro, and a lot of it was packaging. A lot of the 25th anniversary card art was Kunoichi, and then we did those San Diego Comic-Con box sets. And one year, a couple of the members from Kunoichi went out to Hasbro just to we had like quarterly visits, and they came back and they had that hound, and they're like, hey, so and so sent this hound back so you could see it for the to work on the cover of the packaging. And I was like, that's weird. We don't ever need to see this stuff in hand. Oh, he was just gifting it to me, like to get it out of Hasbro. It was like, oh, they need to see this to work on the packaging. And like I was dumbfounded when they handed it to me and gave me exactly the line that he gave. I was like, oh, okay, it was a gift. I get it.
I want to put a pin in Kunoichi. I want to come back to this on the other side of the epic hill we're going to climb.
Yeah.
This is interesting to us. I don't want to forget it. Mark, start with your number one question. So this is the origin question, right?
Yeah.
So Little Sam Wells.
Yeah.
What was his first exposure to the G.I. Joe property? Toys, comics, cartoon?
Yeah. It was cartoon and the toys. I had the first series from 82. I didn't get any carded figures, and I don't know why. I was raised by my great grandmother, and I don't know if it was just like the value perceived in her eyes versus like the single carded figures versus the ones that came in vehicles. So the first 82 stuff that I got was Grand Slam with the Howl, the MMS with Hawk, and the Vamp with Clutch. My first carded figure was the next year with Tripwire. So like forever growing up, I was just like, yeah, this was the first carded figure I got. And I was like, heck yeah. And then I realized that like he wasn't even part of the first series, which kind of like blew me away later when I figured it out. So yeah, the cartoon, absolutely loved it. It was my number one go-to thing. Obviously Joe was my number one. Never really touched the comics. I had like my best friend did the comics, so I got to go over to his house, and he would literally like page for page show me why everything was so cool in every issue. I never really got to sit there and read these comics myself, but Andrew was like, "Hey, look, this is what Storm Shadow's doing now." I'm like, "Oh crap, that's really cool."
When did you start reading comics?
That had to have been late 90s, probably around like 98, 99. I had a friend who gifted me, I think, all four of the Adam Warren Gen 13 bootleg issues. It blew me away, like the comedy that was in those issues, and the art style at the time hit right with what I was into at the time. So right around 98, 99, I went and started collecting all the Marvel Joe. And that apparently was the sweet spot to buy them because I paid like nothing for my collection, and I'm complete, like all 155. And picking them up when I did, like now versus now, like seeing what things are going for. I'm so glad that I got in and out of there when I did.
So, did you ever get into reading a lot of comics? Did you go to a comic book store?
I didn't have a huge comic history other than, like collecting those Joes, random stuff here and there after reading those Gen 13 issues for the first time. It absolutely grew when I got the job at Devil's Due. Besides just reading everything that they had sitting around, we had Comic Wednesdays. We would all pile in like 2 cars and head over to either Chicago Comics or Graham Cracker Comics or Challengers here in Chicago. So like then working at Devil's Due, like the amount of comics I read was massive, and it was kind of crippling, like money wise, versus like almost completely no comics after leaving Devil's Due, like just completely dropped off. I still like make a every other month trip to a comic shop and then like end up spending way too much money, but it's not like I have a pull box anywhere now. I'm not like rabid about certain series. It's just like whatever strikes me when I'm there, I'll pick it up. And even the IDW series, when that came out, I was the only one in the office that was gung-ho about like getting every issue and trying to get as many covers as possible. And then like I think like possibly most of their audience, I died off a little bit into it. Like obviously that Cobra series was one of the best things I'd ever read, and I remember like preaching it to everybody in the studio, just like, did you guys see this? This is awesome. And they're just like, shut up, Sam. Like, we've got other things to work on. Yeah.
All right, let's go back half a step. So you applied for and got this in.
Wait, before even that step. So the toys, did you keep on going from 82 through to, I don't know, present day, or was there a gap?
Yeah, there's the gap that I think all of us have, which was high school. So I looked back, and I think my last Joe that I bought retail was this 92 Firefly. Like when I went back and looked at, like, pulled my collection out, I think my original collection had 80 some odd figures in it. And then I stopped for high school, and I met my then girlfriend, now wife, Liz, in high school. And then like right after high school, we opened up into all the nerdy shit. Like we start going to thrift stores to buy like toys and t-shirts and stuff like that. And then that led to us setting up at toy shows in the area. And at that time I like pulled the Joes out. I was like, well, this is what I was into. I'm going to start collecting these again. And so like we had a list, like she had her own list shared with me that like anytime like a birthday or anniversary would come up, she'd head to the antique mall and sit there at a booth and like have them open a case and like sit on the floor and be like, all right, he doesn't have this hawk. So yeah, same time I completed the Joe run of comics, the Marvel run, I completed my 82 to 94 run of Joes, and I've been buying everything since then.
What were you doing for school or for jobs such that when you saw this internship posting, you were interested?
Yeah, so 2001, Liz moved from St. Louis, where we lived, up to Chicago for school. And, you know, it all coincided. Like she moved up right when the book was coming out, and September 11th happened, and then the book came out, and everything was super weird. I stayed in Chicago, I stayed in St. Louis until the beginning of 2003. So when that first issue came out, it was sold out everywhere. And I couldn't find it anywhere. And she eventually found it up here at, I think, like a Graham Crackers, and she found like a signed copy from maybe Kurth and Blaylock. I wonder if it's the copy I have sitting here. But she found the first issue for me because I was so bummed that I couldn't find it anywhere locally. Yeah, signed copy of Larder and Blaylock. And she found it at like a Graham Crackers. So then like I said, I moved up in 2003. And my job at the time, yeah, I just, jobs for me, I've never done like customer service, which is weird now owning a shop ourselves. Like I'd never worked fast food or like worked at like a retail shop or anything like that. So the job I got when I moved up was working graveyard shift at a insurance company that insured all the cabs in Chicago. So I worked from 7 at night till 3 in the morning, writing reports for these cabbies that would come in. They'd come in with their police report. It was clear on the police report that they were at fault, and it was my job to write a report making it not their fault. So in the mornings, I would intern at Devil's Due, and that was me one day at Graham Cracker Comics, standing there looking over it, and there was a little sign, a little like flyer for the internship. And later I found out it was Susan who put it together. But my story about it is just that like it said, while you won't get to write G.I. Joe, you'll get to learn the ins and outs of the comic industry. And then just like going however many years forward and getting to write G.I. Joe, I was like, screw you, flyer. Like I did it. Yeah, I feel like I wrote an issue and I was like, all right, that was it. I just needed to prove that flyer wrong. I'm out of here.
What was the application process?
I believe Susan was supposed to be the one interviewing, but she was in a meeting when I showed up for my interview, which I don't know how that got crossed. So I interviewed with Marshall Dillon, who was the associate publisher before I got that position. I came in. So previously, so Devil's Due was in their first location on Western Avenue here in Chicago, above a 7-Eleven. And I went in one day and dropped off my resume because of that flyer. And I actually showed up right when they were like frantically packing or like leaving. I think it was maybe like Thanksgiving weekend. And I came in with my resume and got up there, and it was just Blaylock. And he was like he didn't know what was going on. Like they were moving offices, and it was the end of the weekend where everybody had already left for like Thanksgiving to go home. And so it was super weird. I was in there for a second, and I felt like I was really bothering him, but I dropped off my application. Obviously, later I got called and scheduled for an interview, and the interview was at the new location. So I went in, and Marshall brought me over to his little cubicle, and we just kind of stood there in the middle of like the bullpen. And he's just like going through my resume and like all the questions I filled out for their questionnaire. And it like, I don't think any of it really mattered. It was just like, we need to know that you're a human and you can count and read. And it's like, yeah, I can do that. But my favorite part was the end of that questionnaire they have you fill out. It said, are you okay working for 6 weeks without pay? And like when we got to that, and he was like, okay, you said yes. And I was like, yeah, actually, I think you guys should put that question first, because that's going to weed out a lot of people that if you just like, hey, this is unpaid, right? Yeah. So I interned there well past 6 weeks. I was probably there maybe 3 or 4 months, and I didn't want to leave, and they didn't want me to leave, but I couldn't keep working for free. Like both on their conscience and like me, I needed to like focus on getting work that wasn't, free. So after I left, I created an application for the position I wanted. Like I just like made a form about like doing the web store or something like that. And I filled it out and turned in my application to Susan. I was like, here you go. And they thought it was hilarious. Like, like, okay, this position doesn't exist, but like you just created it and you applied for it. And I'd say like maybe 2 weeks later, I was sitting at my desk at my overnight shift, and Susan messaged me. She was like, hey, we want to hire you for that position that you created. I'm like, hell yeah, let's do this. Yeah.
All right. So that must be October or November or December of 2003.
Oh, I mean, it sounds like you've done more research than I remember.
Barely.
So, yeah. Okay.
Barely.
Yeah.
Mark did research for this episode. I just showed up.
Yeah, I do remember that the first time I met those guys, it was a free comic book day when issue 20. Oh wait, no, issue 14 I think was coming out. Yeah, whichever one Seeley took over for, which might have been 16. Oh yeah, 16. Yeah, I remember this one was coming out, and I was on my way to St. Louis, but like on the way, one of the suburbs, the Graham Crackers, I think Mike Norton, Tim Seeley, and Josh Blaylock were all signing at. And I went up there, and, I was a huge fan. So I was like, oh my God, I got to get these signatures. And so like it made my day, because Free Comic Book Day is always first weekend of May. And my birthday is May 5th. And it was just like, oh, this is a really good kickoff to my birthday. And now like, I like Tim's art a bunch, and then he started on issue 16. So it was just like everything came to a head for me as far as a collector. I was like, this is great.
So you were doing the web store. That was the job you were hired for.
Yep. Yeah.
And pretty quickly that grows into other things.
Yeah. So I came in for the web store. I think at one point I might have had the title of inventory manager or something, like in the books. I know it started off when I first started getting my credit, it said office assistant or something like that. But yeah, I started doing the web store. There's a lot of like taking stuff in, like when the books would ship from the printer, and like possibly needing to refill stuff for Diamond out of our stock as well. So like a lot of the back room stuff. I'd say one of the most annoying things we had to do as interns was roll posters, because they just came flat, and we had to roll them and put them in sleeves for like doing cons and like shipping them out to people.
Or tubes, right?
Yeah.
Was there a warehouse? Are you talking about
No,
hundreds or
we
thousands or tens of thousands of copies?
hundreds. Yeah, we had a back room that was just a big storage.
Okay.
And actually, moving or like visiting Chicago in 2001, early on when the book was happening, and visiting Liz and staying with her, I was like, man, I really should go. Like, the address is in the book. I should just go there and see if like they need help. And the thing that I had in my mind was that warehouse with hundreds of thousands of books. I was like, I'm gonna like knock on this door. Somebody on a forklift's gonna stop and be like, "What do you want, kid? Comic books?" I'm like, no, I'm not gonna risk it, because like what I had in my head was literally just like a giant warehouse with nobody know what I was talking about versus what the actuality was.
And this warehouse that you and I are sort of describing, that's Diamond Comic Distributors. That's in like Plattsburgh, New York, or did they have a warehouse in, I forget, North Carolina or South Carolina?
They had like 4 or 5 main warehouses when we were
and then several years later they went down to 2.
Murfreesboro, I think, was a big one.
Okay.
In Tennessee, yeah.
Okay. Mark.
I grabbed a couple of photos off of Facebook where you'd been tagged, which are back from the Devil's Due days. And I wondered what memories these might prompt just from sharing them and seeing what your thought reactions are to them.
Yeah. So this, I think, probably was my idea, but we did a spirit week. So every day there was a different theme to come dressed as. And then we'd give an award based on like, who hit the theme the best. This one was just school spirit. So it was like wear your DDP colors or your Devil's Due shirt or whatever. So I'm there on the left-hand side throwing the little devil horns. My t-shirt that I'm wearing existed before I was there, but since I had access to everything in our storage, that was like, oh, well, this is my t-shirt now.
Can you do a left to right? Who's who?
Oh man, I'm gonna feel really bad if I can't.
Oh, sorry.
No. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, everybody here is cool. Every now and then there'd be an intern flowing through that I like. Was not memorable. On the far left there is Dinosaur, which was our letterer Brian Crowley's mascot that he had in his desk forever. Followed by Caitlin, who took over the web store after I moved to assistant publisher. So next to me there is Blaylock. In the foreground there is Josh Emmons, who he interned for us, but he did a lot of like back end web stuff that like we didn't utilize him for. He was probably rolling posters when he should have been creating a Devil's Due app. Far back there is Nick Grobe, who I think did a lot of technical web stuff for Kanoichi. And then Tim Seeley in front of him next to Blaylock. Far back there is Mike O'Sullivan, who was our main editor at the time. I don't know if Mark Powers was around at this time or had left. Like Mark did a like work from the office, then he would work from home type thing. Sean Dove there, who took on as our main design lead. So he did all the like production on the books. Susan up front, who was VP of marketing. And then Brian Crowley next to her, who was our letterer, I mentioned with the dinosaur. And then, as we called him in the office, Beanie, which is Brian Torney, who interned for us and then took the lead at the other company, Kanoichi, and he is now at Hasbro. So that's everybody there. Yeah.
Cool.
The next one I had was this one. I think this is you on the left.
Yeah.
With a sort of a stripe up your head.
Yeah. What I wouldn't give for that stripe on my head now. Yeah, I don't know what con this is. It looks like it's possibly Wizard World here in Chicago. Yeah, so that's me and Chris Crank, who Crank was our letterer for the longest time, and he ran the website, and he did a lot of the message board like monitoring for us. Man, that rug too. I wonder where that rug is.
Great rug.
How during convention season in the spring and summer and maybe early fall, how many cons was Devil's Due doing, or how often, or how far were you traveling?
Yeah, I mean, we did as many as we could. And cons is where you get that little bonus bump outside of the books. It's obviously there for networking and marketing, but like the sales also really help out all these comic publishers at the time. And it is neat to do those shows too, to like get to see all these people that only exist on message boards at the time. So there were a lot of shows. I probably didn't do too many outside the Chicago area. Like I'd get to any JoeCon they did, or any, like, if we did San Diego Comic Con, I was there for that. But like the smaller stuff, that like the Wizard Worlds out in like Philly and stuff like that, I didn't do those. So those were usually spearheaded by Susan, and she'd grab somebody random. Like Tim would go to draw at the booth, or Blaylock would do most of them.
Were you pulled into helping to pack up for a con or unpack
Oh yeah,
from a con?
absolutely. Every time, it didn't matter what what level I made it to. I was always helping packing for a con. This is actually a question I ask most people. Just like, what have you done at a job that was the most outside of your job description? And mine was, we had a warehouse at some point later on, like probably around like 2008 to 2010, on the south side of Chicago, that just housed our books. Like, we got way too many books, and we needed a place to put them. So we had a building that wasn't a legit storage building. It was a friend of Blaylock's who owned a building, and it was just a vacant building. And so there were other businesses storing stuff in there, whatever. We had a semi come and drop off some books, like a pallet of books, and I wasn't there. No one was really there, but there were some guys working in the building at the time, and we're like, well, just, can you take them off the semi and put them on the dock, whatever. When I showed up, these books were locked inside of a white cargo van that was just inside the building, and the only door that was open was the back two doors, and we needed a box for this convention that was in the driver's side seat. So the only way that I could get to this box was either empty the entire van, or what I did, crawl along the top of all these boxes inside this van to get to the front, and like try to, like, no leverage, just like lift this box up. And like, as I'm lifting that box up, I remember screaming, "I'm an assistant publisher." And so that moment is just like, I try to see if there's people that have like similar moments in their career, where they're just like, why am I doing what I'm doing right now that has nothing to do with what I should be doing?
One of the things about retail and publishing is, sooner or later you may just be moving boxes of books, and if you have a book and it's $20 or $30 and you can sell it, then you make your like wholesale on that. And if you have 2 or 10, you hope you can sell them. And if you have 100, you start to think, is this 10 too many or 50 too many? And if you have 200, it starts to become incredibly unvaluable and bothersome. And they stop being gorgeous, interesting books, and they just become widgets, just sort of anything. Like, it might as well be bicycle gears or light bulbs. Why do we have all these stupid light bulbs? I'm selling comic books.
So I grabbed my long box from the basement today to bring this up right before the podcast. And I asked my wife to open the door when I was coming up. And when I got up to the top, like carrying this long box, she opened the door and I went, why do long boxes exist? Like, why don't I have 2 short boxes?
I have an answer for that. The difference is, when comics were printed on newsprint, long boxes were not heavy. And with comics printed on glossy paper, and they're now thinner and it's heavier, and then you can fit many more glossy paper comics in a long box. Long boxes are really heavy, and most people should not be lifting long boxes filled with modern glossy comics. It's actually just too heavy, and we're all going to hurt our backs or our necks.
Oh yeah, no, I have a horrible back, and it's probably one of the main things I took away from Devil's Due was this back that I got from lifting boxes.
So there's probably a curve in terms of seniority of role about what you do. Like, if you're starting at the very bottom, you could say it's not my job, but you're just told to do this, that, and everything. and everyone's your boss, and you just got to do what you're told. And then sort of in the middle, you kind of that's not my job. I don't do that. And then as you get more senior on the other end, it's like, well, now I'm responsible for everything. So
yeah, and also feeling bad of telling someone else to do it. It's like, I'm just going to do it.
Mark, is this the parabola of corporate responsibility? I think this is a shirt or a mug you can make and sell. Was there another...
I probably need to quit this podcasting talk and come up with a management theory. Yeah.
Is there one more photo you wanted to show?
It was this photo, which is linked to a video, which I'll just I'll plug in here. So this is the visit from NBC's Leonard Michaels, aka Scoop, and I think this is a very young Sam Wells talking through some figures from boxes.
That's a new Storm Shadow, Leatherneck. That's Payload.
Yeah. So they were like, "Hey, we want to make you look like Rain Man. How can we do that?" I was like, "Oh, all right, here we go." Yeah. So that whole experience was pretty great when Leonard Michaels came in and we had the Scoop Fest. That was pretty fun getting to film that, and like we all did little bits of acting here and there. But part of the reason I think that I got hired was in my application, or maybe the intern level. I mentioned that I had all the figures from 82 to 94. And this shelf behind me was built to fit into my cubicle when I got there, this gray shelf. Obviously, it was really great for reference. Like Tim would run over all the time and grab a few figures and run back to his desk to draw them, rather than like looking online for the image. Like it's much easier if you have the figure in your hand, And I also, I think, Marvel 1 through 155, I was the only one that had that collection, so I brought mine into the office for easy reference as well.
Wow, you were the G.I. Joe history librarian archivist. So Blaylock has said that when he was pitching, or very early on after he made the deal for the license, that Hasbro didn't have a Bible for G.I. Joe. And then fast forward to 2004, Spy Troops, there is a Bible. I have it. It's over there. It's over there. And some of it is scans of old cutout file cards from the backs of toys, or photocopies of Order of Battle pages.
Okay, I don't think that I've seen that Bible. We do have like a whatever the cross promotion, like here's all the assets, like digital and visual assets for the brand. We got that when Spy Troops was coming out, but I don't think we ever saw that Bible. But that's cool that they someone there had to scan books.
We're starting to cobble it together. Also, I don't know this object's precise provenance, so it may be that like an intern or a fan like added to it. I don't want to suggest necessarily that like an official Hasbro employee was like, we don't have anything, let's scan old toys, but that might have been it. So as the fan employee who maybe didn't know more than some of the other employees, but had sort of a more consistent like breadth of connection to the brand, did you feel like you could sort of represent sort of some of the fans who were coming to the Devil's Due stuff? Did you feel like the Devil's Due stuff was continuing the Marvel run, but also making its own space? How do you see your role at Devil's Due sort of informally as a G.I. Joe fan?
I think, and actually this phrase is attributed to somebody else at Devil's Due internally, but I feel like I was the what we should do guy, or what would be cool, without actually using those words. Where I would see something happening and be like, but it should be this, if I got to it early enough, meaning all the way up to like possibly Tim drawing, be like, but could this happen instead? Like not changing story, but like adding what I could where I could. that was fan service, you know? Yeah, I mean, something like that header there. This isn't historical, but just that, you know, like, and then there was one just like telling people, like, you know, this is where Snake Eyes is dying, you know, like, yeah, stuff like that. Like, I can flip through the books and see little things here and there that I know that was me. And there's actually one where we added something into a book and the author got upset about it because he didn't know that change had happened until he received his comp copies. And something that, like, I was like, it would be cool if this line happened as a throwback to something. And then the author got in and was like, what the heck is this?
Are you able to be specific on that one?
I don't know if I want to.
Can you talk about your progression from or you've done from intern to web store manager?
Mm-hmm.
How were your responsibilities added to, and how did you make it up to your top position there at Devil's Due?
Yeah, and I don't really remember the timeline too much, other than associating my first big blunder as assistant publisher, so I know what book that was. But so internship to web store manager, inventory manager, whatever, responsibilities did not change that much. It was just I was now getting paid, you know, like I was part of the staff. So it was a lot of the grunt work and, you know, rolling posters and telling interns to roll posters and getting mad when the interns aren't rolling posters. Like, we had an intern that, like, refused and would just like, I want to go out in the main area and pitch stories all day. I'm like, that's not what interns do, man. I'm sorry. I actually told Josh this story recently, and he apparently didn't know that this happened. We had a G.I. Joe event at our shop recently where Blaylock came and signed, and then Roger and Josh, who wrote the after action report, came and sold their book and signed their book and stuff. And so we were just, you know, reminiscing about Joe stuff all day. And I was like, Josh, the day that you called me to offer me the publisher role, I was at a Coinstar dumping coins into a machine. Like, Liz and I were standing at the grocery store dumping coins, and he called and he's like, hey, you know, Marshall's out. Do you want to take on this role? You know, like, obviously it's going to be tougher, and like, here's the pay. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I do. Thank you. And like, I just told him that story, you know, a couple months ago. He's like, I had no idea. I remember that call, but I don't remember hearing change clinging in the background.
So let me interrupt my own question. What does a publisher do?
Yeah, it was all the boring stuff that, I mean, like, obviously I made it as much about Joe as possible, but it's a lot of communicating with the printer and being the go-between with the printer and Diamond. So setting print runs, looking at the trends of your previous sales, knowing when you need to drop or raise your print runs on a book, like when a title is like gaining or you need to do second printings. And then, yeah, just the logistical stuff. And then on all your free time, like popping over to editorial and putting your nose in there.
So that's prompts all sorts of questions. So does that data about like the number of sales and things across the Devil's Due, does that still exist? I guess is question number one. And then maybe sort of question number two is, can you sort of talk to the kind of trajectory that maybe the sales had over the course of the Devil's Due era?
Your first question was, is the info out there about the numbers? Yeah, I think it's readily available somewhere. I never tracked that, but I know that there's a lot of people putting that info out there. I think that info is out there for any comic book. But I purged my brain of all the number stuff, like, after I left Devil's Due. I know there was a number that we always sat above, and I can't for the life of me remember what that was. I know that, like, you know, when you reboot a series like we did with America's Elite, or like when we did like a Frontline or Special Missions, you always get like a huge bump. And I don't know what that bump is per se, but like, I want to say like your sales could go anywhere from like 100,000 copies when you're starting out to dropping down to like 22,000 copies when you're like, I guess the book's still worth it, you know? And we had a lot of like creator owned stuff come through where people would bring their own books to us, like not licensed stuff, but just like, here's a book I want to do. And I was like, well, the deal is like, if your book doesn't get enough to warrant the print, you have to pay for the print. And there would be books that would come in with like 900 copies ordered. And it's like, I mean, that's just what the creator owned life is, you know, like going through a publisher, you have to eat that cost, you know. Like the way that they're doing it now is way better, you know, with a lot of people just doing it through Kickstarter, you know, like don't involve those publishers. There's no need to do that, you know, just get your book to the people that want it.
Or publishers going to Kickstarter, and then they've covered their basic cost, and then they can list in diamond previews and sell extra copies through stores.
One more question about sort of sales. So at the moment, we've been sort of doing a lot of focus on the show at the America's Elite era and the relaunch. Do you remember if that kind of had the success in terms of creating a bump to the numbers of that relaunch that was hoped for?
Absolutely, yeah. That was a huge win. Obviously, the money wasn't there with issue 0 because it was a 25-cent issue. But as you notice, like we went right back into the second printing that came out at a normal price point. So the second printing of issue 0 came back out, and I think the retail at the time was $2.95 on the cover. But yeah, for sure, like relaunching and rebooting, it's just it's a necessary evil in comics in general, you know.
So I'm on Comicron right now, which is the website of John Jackson Miller, who's the like guru of American comic book sales figures, and he has also written Star Wars novels, and I think he wrote Iron Man comics for a year, and so America's Elite in August of 2005 sold an estimated 22,000 units in the direct market.
And what issue? I'm sorry.
Issue 2.
Yeah.
And and so that's it hasn't quite cracked the top 100. And as a comparison, everyone, Justice, is it Jim Kruger and Doogie Braithwaite and Alex Ross Justice League 12-issue painted series, that's selling 190,000 units that month, and New Avengers from Marvel's at about 150,000. But as often happens, there's a drop off. There are the top 10 books that are selling over 100,000, and then things go down sort of linear but quickly from there. And there are plenty of books that are selling much less than G.I. Joe. There's an X-Men book that's selling much less than G.I. Joe, and there's a DC miniseries that ties into their big event that's selling much less than G.I. Joe. Just as two examples.
I don't think it was ever said, but there's definitely a number that like under that amount we no longer do these books. That like either if it was like one of our own books or like a license, like we're gonna kill it under like X amount. But I don't know if it was said that like Joe wouldn't have come to that. Like we had a contract. We're going to do as many books as we can in that time, because there's also the sale of the trade paperbacks that did really well for us. So like when the book market got a hold of our trade paperbacks, that's where a big bump came for us dollar wise, So I feel like the number you said for that number 2 or whatever was usually right around where Joe sat. It was like 22,000 or whatever. Yeah, I feel like that's just kind of where it rode out for the rest of the series.
Do you remember what the print runs of your graphic novel collections were for G.I. Joe, very roughly?
Man, like I said, I purged a lot of the numbers. I wish I would have kept at least like one spreadsheet.
Because Mark, did Blaylock say that those, or maybe it was Jour, those were not as big a driver as issues at the time for Devil's Due? That it was a part of the equation, but it wasn't sort of as much of the equation as now.
I don't know. I think I remember Blaylock saying it was an important part of, like, you could sell the baseline of the single issues, but then you'd get the sort of the premium bump from the reprints.
Maybe I'm remembering it wrong.
But I can't remember the exact words that he said.
The downside to that was that the book market ordering the trade paperbacks, those were returnable at any time. And so when the 2008 thing hit and borders closed, the book market was just like, here's all your books back, right when everything's the worst it could be. And it was like, wow, okay.
All right. So for listeners and viewers, your local comic book store is getting comics non-returnable. That's what the direct market is. So the discount is higher, and your local comic book store is stuck with all of its unsold copies. That's why you need to go to your shop and clear out your box, right? Don't leave them stuck with comics you said you were going to buy and then you don't. But you go to a quote regular bookstore, and any unsold copies they ship back and they get their money back. And that's the fundamental difference between the sort of the book trade, the regular bookstore market, and the direct market of comic book specialty shops.
Sam, you said that you remember becoming the assistant publisher because that's when some big snafu happened.
Yeah, and thinking back on this, I honestly don't know the answer to what should have happened. So it was our first trade paperback of the Forgotten Realms Homeland book. It was our first dip into the D&D stuff, and we were really excited because the books were selling great, and the Homeland book had like a crazy print run. Like I'm assuming around 100,000 copies of the trade paperback, but those weren't all for orders. Like we just printed enough because we knew we were going to have a sell through, and we eventually did. But the big headache was my Diamond rep called me and he's like, "Hey, we've got pallets upon pallets of these books that we don't have orders for. Why did you send these to us?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just basically hit enter on the previous like print run that we've done, like coming in as the publisher. I was like, I'm just following all the guidelines I have here. Like, what did I do wrong?" And apparently, Diamond doesn't want to sit on all these books. But I'm like, well, they're not going to the printer. Like the printer's not holding on to them. And if you're not holding on to them, where are they supposed to go? Like they're not coming here. Like we can't house them. So like that instance still baffles me to this day. Like everything after that we printed that Diamond requested, like they only got what they requested. But I still don't understand who was supposed to get those books in this instance.
Is there a scene where Blaylock calls you into his office and he chastises you for making this costly mistake?
No. There isn't. Like, if anything, it was me getting off the call and like looking over at him, like, what the hell was that? Because Diamond moved those books so quickly after that phone call that it was like almost a non-thing. Like, why did we even have to have this conversation?
Okay, as publisher, so we've been talking mostly about G.I. Joe, and you've mentioned Dungeons and Dragons and creator-owned stuff. As publisher, were you doing phone calls or email with Hasbro, with Wizards of the Coast, with Dreamwave, with creator-owned stuff? I'm sort of trying to figure out, because we know that Blaylock is like the creative head of the company, but also the business head of the company. And I'm trying to figure out what are some of the other things you as publisher do? So who else were you talking to, and what other decisions were you making?
Yeah, so I had relationship with Hasbro, but it was more friendship from just visiting and cons and stuff like that. I wasn't really involved on any of the in-betweens with Devil's Due and Hasbro. That was mostly editorial and then Blaylock. I took on some editorial roles as well as a publisher. So some of those creator-owned books that would come through, or some of the smaller licenses that were brought to us, I would be the point person for those. And then also in the same breath, an editorial view for some of those books. I remember one of my favorite creator-owned books that came through was Lost Squad, which was this little World War II team of dudes that were going to get all the cool mystical artifacts back from German troops. And it was a really nice book that like went, I think, six issues and then got a trade. And that was, I think, maybe one book after that. But that, and then some of the other licenses, I literally just pulled into a Walmart parking lot this past weekend, and pulling into the parking lot, I remembered being on the phone with the license holder for Halloween and like walking them through like what we were working on. And thinking at the time, like, this is weird. I'm at Walmart trying to go inside and I'm on this call right now with the guy that owns Halloween, like making sure that everything's good with him on what we're doing with his title, you know?
Did Devil's Due make Halloween comics?
We did. Yeah. Yeah. We did Chucky, which I think specifically we were allowed to do Chucky, but not Child's Play because of some rights holding thing. We did Halloween. I feel like we did more horror than I'm remembering right now, because we had a horror title that is still going. It's not a Devil's Due, but that Hack Slash book, it was one of our books, and like it was a perfect pairing for all these horror titles, where the lead of that book was like the final girl that survives, so she goes and hunts down all these slashers. So we sort of became like a mini hub for horror comics for a bit, licensed horror stuff.
Going back to something you said at the beginning about the flyer for the internship, it's, while you won't write G.I. Joe comics, you'll learn the ins and outs of publishing. So it sounds like it's safe to say that you did. Are there ins and outs of publishing that you learned in your years at Devil's Due that benefited you in your jobs after, or that you haven't quite been able to sort of make use of?
I credit Devil's Due for teaching myself and in some sense my wife as well how to run our business on like a shoestring budget. Like, we know how to get by on like next to nothing and still have a presence and and be known. So that, I mean, Devil's Due was a scrappy company, you know, like we were there in the top 4 for however long we were doing Joe, but you know, like, get by on what you can and like do what you can with what you got. It really instilled that in me, and I definitely use that to this day, you know. I do like that what you just mentioned, the flyer, and like learn the ins and outs of publishing. It should have said learn them, and then when you're done, forget them, because like I didn't want to hold on to any of that, you know. Like, by the time you leave any job, you're just like done with it. And luckily, like where I went next, I didn't really have to like worry about any of that stuff anymore. You know, I didn't stay in the comics realm.
Were you, in taking over the publishing job, one of the things that's interesting to me about comics is paper stock, and ink, right? And the actual saturation levels, like the actual specs. And I don't really know anything about it, but I can sometimes look at a comic and I'll say, I don't think this is the right paper for this coloring. Or I'll say, I think this color, I think these colors looked better on the colorist's monitor than they do on this paper. Did you ever go to the printer? Did you ever like troubleshoot any of that?
We didn't. We had visits from our printer every now and then, like when we were re-upping our contract, like they would come into town. We printed a lot in Canada, and then near the end we did some printing in China, but we learned the hard way about, like, you know, shipping by boat for books. And it's like when there's orders, it's like you have no answer, and there's a boat somewhere that has all these books that everybody's waiting for.
The contrast being that if you do it by plane, you know when it's coming, but it's much more expensive.
My God, yeah. And like what we're printing over there is probably like all the omnibuses, like, so the heavy hardbound stuff. And it's like there's no way we can freight these through air, you know. One of my favorite memories of the printer coming to visit us, like when we were just like having a meet and greet and like talking about renewing our contract with them, he came in and Josh and I were in an office with him, and we were just talking about like, well, you know, like any business, like we're looking at other options for printing, price being the number one selling point for us. And the rep from that company said, well, you know, you guys haven't been doing self covers. You could switch to self covers and save a ton on every issue. And we were like, what now?
No self covers. No.
Yeah, that's where it happened.
Okay.
I wonder if you could see what issue it started on, or if we even...
Sam, tell everyone what a self cover is.
It's when you're no longer using cardstock for the cover, which is the this section here, the front and back, and then you just use the first page to print your cover on. You
use the same
interior,
the same paper stock as the interior pages for the cover.
Yeah. And honestly, looking at this, I don't know if we did self covers to Joe.
I don't think you did.
Yeah, no, that might have been for some of our own books.
Listeners and viewers, if you have gotten a lot of free comic book day comics in the last couple of years are printed with self covers, when you hold them, they just seem a little less robust. They're just a little flimsier. And that goes also for the Halloween giveaway that Diamond and Penguin Random House does. And there was a brief point in like 1996 or so when Gemstone was doing the Disney Comics license. This is during the original run of Don Rosa's Eisner Award-winning Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck. And the original issues, some of them are printed on self covers because the company was trying to keep from having to raise cover prices. And so it's this comic on like newsprint, and the cover stock is newsprint. And it doesn't have a great feeling when you read it.
It doesn't last as long either, like for archiving your books, that's not great.
Yeah, and if when you hold a comic, if you are aware of your hand ever so slightly perspiring, most comics can take a little bit of that, and self covers cannot. You just immediately know that the bottom of your comic is just a little wavy, a little lumpy. My hands are very dry. How dare you? How dare you?
In the same vein, that's when we probably started doing these prestige covers, the collector edition covers, which would be a thicker cardstock than a normal cover, so that we could charge more. And it was just because it was different art, so you're buying a collector piece of the art, but right. You're also paying for the thicker cardstock that we were using on these.
This is what DC Comics has been doing in 2021, 2022, 2023, where the A cover is like $3.99 or $4.99, and then the B cover is a different drawing printed on cardstock, and it's $1 more. And oftentimes the logo is much smaller.
This was $8.95. Oh, it's a double issue though. It's 48 pages, so that has something to do with it too.
At what point are you starting to suggest that you might write a story, or getting really anxious that you want to write a story, but you can't because you're sort of an editor and sort of the publisher?
Yeah, I don't think that I ever really raised that flag until that Special Missions happened, because they were looking for writers. The first thing that I wrote was bios in the back of Master and Apprentice Volume 1. So Jour was Master and Apprentice book. He was compiling it, like he was putting a bunch of fun stuff together for the trade, like all the extras and bonus and stuff. And he's like, well, I want to do like file card stuff in the back. So that was sort of the beginning of like the data desk, like where I got to do the data desk. Like we'd already done the battle files like early on with the main series originally. But then when they came to the bios that he wanted written, he said that like he was going to do a couple characters, but he didn't want to bother with the others, or didn't have time to do the others. And they're like, hey, Sam. And this was probably still when I was doing web store stuff, when Master and Apprentice came out. So I was writing bios over there in that little desk filled with all the stock for web store orders. And then when America's Elite Data Desk came out, that's when I was assistant publisher by that point. It's hard for me to remember. I know if I sat here and read them, I could tell you which ones I wrote, but this was me and the editor, Mike O'Sullivan, going through and writing all these. And I remember the biggest, the one that made me the most nervous was Roadblock, like writing history stuff for Roadblock. Like there's obviously a wealth of knowledge out there for these characters, but like compiling it and like adding new stuff to make it our version was nerve-wracking, to say the least, for Roadblock.
What was your working relationship with Mike O'Sullivan?
Very close. Like we worked very close. He ran most stories by me by that point to see if I had anything to input to help out with. And then, yeah, we did the Special Missions Brazil together. He wrote the backup story, which is the shipwreck and Cover Girl, which oddly enough got the cover. Well, so this was my revenge on that. So Mike O'Sullivan wrote the backup story, which was 8 pages long, and my story was the lead-in, which I think was 28 to 30 pages. And then when it came for solicitations for Diamond for the direct copy, he was like, "Oh, well, I just got this image made of Shipwreck and Cover Girl for the cover." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. That's that's the backup story and your story, but okay. But at the time, I commanded the print runs, and I had a lead on like what we could do for con covers, or this one that's on right now is the web store cover. So I was like, all right, well, we're doing a small print run of a web store cover, and it's going to be my team, and it's going to be more expensive, very small print run, and people are going to hunt for this one now. And secondary market, it's up there.
And
Versus
this Brazil cover with the green background, is this supposed to look like a paperback book with some scratches or shine on the left and right?
Yeah. So this was Sean Dove designing this for me, and I feel like this was just where he was at this point in time, design wise. He was like, let's make it look worn. I'm like, oh, okay. I just care about these characters getting on the cover. And so he was pulling the data desk images for this and repainting them, just changing the color to match the Mission Brazil stuff. But wetsuit, as you see in the back there, his legs, he wasn't drawn in the data desk files with legs. He was drawn swimming. So like he had the flippers on and everything, but we needed him standing on land. That's why he's pushed to the back, and he has America's Elite Flint's legs back there, just to match, give him a gray and match.
So there's like a gap in the schedule, or there's an opportunity in the schedule for an issue, for something, and you say, hey, I want to write something.
Yeah, and I think this was the second to last. I think the last special missions was Cobra. And this was the last one that was sitting on our board at the time, and it didn't have a writer attached to it. And at that point, it would have just been Special Missions book this month. And I was like, hey, I don't know why, but we haven't done Brazil yet. And there's already characters to plug into this one. So this one's like half written.
Let's go back a step to the first one that you wrote, because you wrote Pets.
Oh God, yeah. Again, the close relationship I had with Mike O'Sullivan, I wrote Pets and then gave it to him, and then what was printed was what he wrote. Like he took my story and he's like, okay, but here's what I think it should be, and then gave me first credit on writing, and I'm like, that's not my story anymore. There's definitely like, essence of what I did, but yeah. And again, that's the backup story, and it didn't get the cover for some reason. That's what's super fun though. Like it was just, that was just a backup throwaway-ish type thing to do. And I don't know, a lot of people, it resonated with a lot of people. We got a lot of feedback on that one. Positive feedback.
All right. So Brazil, did you have the Operation Brazil set as a kid?
Not as a kid. At the time that I wrote this, I did.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I missed that as a youngster. But first thing I did when I was pitching doing Brazil as special missions, I went back to Yojo and I listened to the audio recording they had on there of the tape, and I was like, oh, this is horrible. We can't do this. It's like Baroness, Cobra Commander, and Destro riding in a raft to grab a satellite or something like that. I was like, that's not I can't make a whole story out of that. Like that's
was there a brief second where you were like, we could do something about a satellite, maybe just a bit better?
Yeah, but I think I just wanted to bring Headman in because how much had he gotten in the past like 20 years in Joe books? So it was cool to throw him down there. And I actually didn't realize at the time when the book came out, and I asked for like Brazilian troops, and what I got was NATO troops. I didn't realize that when the book was published. Like the guys coming in with the light blue helmets, that's NATO. And I was just like, cool. I had no idea.
Okay, so this is a good segue. All right, so as a kid, you had read some comics, not a ton of comics. As a Devil's Due employee, you were devouring comics and helping to make comics. And now you were writing a couple stories. So did you have any particular requests or ideas about what you wanted in the art or the visual storytelling, or were you just sort of leaving it to the artists and the sort of Devil's Due like pipeline?
Yeah, there were a couple. I wish I had Brazil right in front of me. There are a couple things that you lay out how you visually want it to look. If not, you just say who's on the page, who's saying what. What I remember is page 1 and page 20. Oh, here I have the final page here, that like the original artwork. So it was 25 pages. So page 1 and page 25, I remember specific things from that. Where page 1, I laid it out how I wanted it to look, like with the opening scene and all that. But what Valentine turned in, he added at the bottom all 5 of the dudes on the roster. And I was like, that's brilliant. Like, that's great. You're showing all their faces up front. I love it. So that was the one change that he made that I was like, oh, that's thank you very much for taking some liberties there. And then the thing with the last page, what's printed is much different than what was drawn because Hasbro was not happy with, let me grab it and see if I can actually show it. There's a lot of Firewall's butt there in that last panel. Here we go. Yeah, and what's printed is cropped, so it's mostly just the hand with the helmet there. Like when it went for approval, Hasbro was like, nope, because it's a butt. We can't have butts.
Okay, this is a good segue. How would you characterize Devil's Due's relationship with Hasbro? Or if it was different over time, how did it change over time? How was it when you got there?
It was like a friendship when I got there. And I recently wrote that forward for the After Action report, and I said working with Hasbro was like working with like a schizophrenic beast, because from any point to the next, what was required of us was just all over the board. And I dive into this in a little bit in that forward, but it was like, what are they going to say no to now? Like I feel like, do you remember the Simpsons episode where Burns is yelling at whoever to shave their sideburns, and he's just got no hair here, and he still yells at him like, I said get rid of those sideburns.
Oh, the baseball episode.
Yeah. He's like, I said no sideburns. He clearly has no hair. It's like, that's how it felt with Hasbro sometimes, to the point of like getting rid of a butt on the last panel of a comic.
Okay, now not knowing more, I would ask, well, you were at Devil's Due for 7 years. Surely the people you're working with at Hasbro change over time. Whereas Hasbro is changing the G.I. Joe line, its expectations are changing. Are you saying that the sort of inconsistency was sort of greater than a natural progression?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. But what I think came with the natural progression was that when you get a new brand person, and no matter how cool they are with you, it really depends on their relationship within Hasbro with marketing, Hasbro's marketing. Because marketing, and I'll say marketing / legal, is sort of what screws up everything cool that comes out of Hasbro. It's the people that like step in and want to make a change that's not necessary just to say that they've done their job. And I've seen that so many times, not just as Devil's Due, but like as a fan of things coming out of Hasbro, as somebody who worked with Hasbro internally, doing like that creator services work. Anytime something hit that last step there, decisions were made, and rarely was it the right decision for what was being presented. Yeah. And you can ask people that worked at Hasbro that came out and just bring up legal or marketing, and just the eyes will roll.
I had a couple of examples that I can share on screen from what you mentioned in the After Action report specifically. So maybe you can talk to some of these examples.
Yeah, this one was embarrassing. Like, so we had this amazing cover by Adam Hughes. I don't know if we had ever worked with Adam Hughes before this, and getting him to do a cover was just, like it was a bucket list item for so many people at Devil's Due. Like, oh my God, we got Adam Hughes to do an amazing Baroness cover. And the notes that came back, I think originally on this one was, sorry, I've got a plane going overhead. It's too sexual with her mouth open. So as embarrassing as that was to have to go back to him and be like, hey, there's notes from the licensor, the revised cover got scrapped as well. Like when he closed her mouth, tilted her head. Yep. And then they were like, nope, still too sexy. And that's, I don't know if you know this, but like that's whatever is going on in that person's head. You know, that's it's similar to the rock posters cover we did with Scarlet, where she has a pair of dice in her hand and it's snake eyes and she's blowing on the dice, and Hasbro came back with, no, we get the joke, she's blowing snake eyes, you can't do this. And it's like, that wasn't an intention at all, and that's weird that that's what you came up with, but they're dice, you blow on dice, it's snake eyes because you can get snake eyes on a dice. Like that was not, yeah. So it's whatever was in that person's head projected onto the image that they were looking at the time. That's where we got.
And Adam Hughes ain't cheap.
No, yeah. So
and presumably, if you ask him to do a revision, if you ask an artist to do a revision and they don't want to because they haven't scheduled that into their sort of month, and then also the cover doesn't run anyway, maybe they don't want to work with you again in the future because they feel like they're going to get jerked around.
Right. And it's a shame too that this cover never got published. Except it did at IDW. What was it, like issue 2, issue 4, or something like that? They used it as their retail incentive cover.
Something like that, yeah.
Wasn't so bad after all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually, oh man, I don't remember who it was, but I got a call from Hasbro after like the license was over with. We still had a relationship with them because we were still doing, I think, D&D and whatever. But I got a call from somebody on the Jour brand. And they're like, hey, can we get contact info for Adam Hughes? And I was like, yeah, sure. Let me send you that email. And that's what it was for, was to get that cover for IDW. Yeah, so on the screen now is what Tim cranked out in an afternoon for us in frustration. Everyone frustrated. Us, Hughes, possibly the fans not getting the book they had hoped for. And as it's been mentioned, instead of signing his name, he wrote sorry, the same way that he signed Seeley there on the cover.
Also, I should add, if a comic book is solicited with one cover and then the publisher doesn't publish the comic with that cover, even though the direct market of comic book stores, comics are bought non-returnable. In that case, the stores can return all unsold copies for their money back. And so that would be sort of the triple whammy where a publisher might get stung by a deal going wrong.
And I can say that Joe collectors don't return their covers. So we didn't see any of these coming back, not to my knowledge, and I would have been the one aware of this. We didn't get any of these books back, and I think the thing that helped us was that we weren't putting it on like a retailer incentive cover or like a more expensive book. It was going on the normal book. You know, had it been like an $8 like cardstock fancy, like you got to order like 600 copies to get this one, you know, like we would have gotten those back. But luckily people were just like, all right, it's Baroness, it's in the slab, let's move on to the next issue.
Mark, do you have another image to show, or should I ask my next question?
I had a couple of examples. This was, again, you mentioned in the after action report about the Hasbro edict for not having weapons on the front cover, and you talked about these two as examples. So
as you'll see, both covers, they're just very angry and in your classic fisticuffs, where the covers started originally with weapons on the cover. And we were told at various stages to pull the weapons. Like you can literally see Duke's hand holding a gun there.
It's interesting because an earlier edict from Hasbro regarding G.I. Joe was no mushroom clouds. I don't know. I think that was more related to the cartoon and not the comic book. And I don't know that one was actually written down, although I have a recollection of it.
Which is strange at this point, like to get that sort of feedback on this cover, because it's the penultimate, like right here at 35. Like this second to last issue, we shouldn't have gotten that much feedback at this point. Like we were out the door, and they were focusing on the movie and IDW at this point. So
one last question on covers. Talking about the changing the covers reminded me of something that Blaylock had said, which I've not heard the background to yet, which was that I think it was maybe issue 36 and something happened with that cover.
Oh, the incentive cover, yeah. I asked Sean Dove, who was our designer at the time, if he could pull Quick Kick from the original last issue of Marvel 155, where he appeared erroneously on the cover, having been killed much earlier in the series. But he appeared on their last issue, so we pulled literally that Quick Kick off the cover of the Marvel run and threw him inside of the helicopter that is only faintly visible if you look between the logo, the America's Elite logo at the top.
Is this the Herb Trimpe cover?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, it's a cover swipe of the Marvel 155 where the Joes are folding up the flag and behind them is the helicopter, but most of the helicopter is blocked by the logo.
Yeah, let's see how close I can get here to this.
Is it his eyes peering out
Yes.
over the R,
Yep.
the letter R
Yep.
from America's Elite?
So that's Quick Kick hiding there. Yeah. And he was pulled from the 155 cover. Yeah.
Sam, can you talk about the end of Devil's Due's G.I. Joe relationship with Hasbro? At what point is it like, it's a year or 3 years in, the license is going to be up, and the company is presumably starting to plan for like a pitch for re-upping? Or do you know that the movie is on the horizon? What is the feeling at Devil's Due, and what's the talk?
Right. Well, I can start by saying that, like, when we did lose the Joe license and we were in the end of publishing the Joe comic, that the staff changed dramatically internally at Devil's Due. Just meaning, like, there's a lot of people that were let go just because we no longer had like our flagship book, and the company couldn't sustain as many people as we had on staff. I think at our height we might have been like 12 people in the studio, and then after that, like, maybe down to 6. So I took on a lot more roles after that. I don't think I was doing web store. I think we still had somebody running the web store for us, but I moved over to designing and doing a lot of the art direction on like the production side, like for building the books and getting them to the printer. So when the renewal was coming, I don't know how often it was. I wasn't involved in that. It was something that Blaylock did. But when the renewals happened, all I know is that previously, before the time that we lost the license, it was more of them just sending over the contract to be signed. I don't know if that was an annual thing or like every couple years or whatever, but I know that when this one came up, it was red flag time, because they were like, Hasbro came back and they said, prepare a pitch because the movie's coming out and we are going to shop the license. And we were like, okay. So I don't remember who all went, but Hasbro had everybody out there in a weird, awkward, everybody sit in the waiting room type thing. And Blaylock went out there with probably Tim Seeley and possibly Mike O'Sullivan or Mark Powers. And we did our pitch and found out later that we no longer had the license, which for us, the timing was off because we had just advertised however many issues into and had just published issue 1 of our year-long event for World War III. So we had to appeal to Hasbro and just be like, hey, you guys approved this 12-issue, like, year-long story arc that we have just begun publishing and have solicited like maybe 4 or 5 issues out. And they're like, okay. So we went back and signed like an amendment to our contract, giving us the right to publish just those 12 issues and only one collected edition, which is why World War III was an omnibus and not multiple trades throughout the year. They just wanted to clean it up as possible, or as quickly as possible. And luckily, like, it all wrapped up right before any of the IDW stuff was slated to happen, to coincide with like the movie launch in 2009. I don't remember when our last issue came out. Did you guys? Oh, I have 36 here. This was June of 2008. And I believe, if I remember correctly, the omnibus followed in stores the week after issue 36.
Like the same month or the next month.
Yeah, like almost immediately. So it was just like, yeah, get that done and wrap it up. And what's a shame is, arguably, and in a lot of people's minds, the best storyline we've done was World War III. And it seemed like we had just hit in a really good stride with the storytelling and the art and everything. And it's like, all right, we'll wrap it up.
So, were there any changes in that stretch of issues now that you didn't have a longer deal with Hasbro, or that the momentum was different, or the sort of emotional support was different?
I don't think too much changed. I feel like I did take on a little bit more on the approval side from editorial. Like I think I was the one submitting things for approval, but I don't think too much had changed in that aspect. It didn't really feel like, like we were being abandoned. Like we were still, part of the Hasbro family at that time. But I mean, it's hard not to be doom and gloom at that point when you know that you're saying goodbye to something that you loved working on and you're a fan of. And I'm trying to remember. I know this was cut short too, and this was like such a huge like hit for us. Like people loved this book, and having Hama back working on this. This one came out October 2007. So yeah, we wrapped this one up way earlier than it should have been, and only got one trade paperback out, which I think excludes the last couple issues.
Yeah, this is for the audio only listeners. This is Storm Shadow by Larry Hama. I think there might have been maybe a 6-issue trade, and there was maybe a couple of extra issues that never made it into a trade.
Yeah, I think 6 or 7 issues, and then maybe one didn't make it.
The collection has 5 issues, and the series went 7 issues.
Okay.
You said it got cut short. Sam, was there anything written or drawn for an 8th issue or beyond?
Certainly there was with Mike O'Sullivan editing this book, but Larry's way of writing is very in the moment. He doesn't. It's not like a traditional script comes through right away. It's more of an outline. So I'd say, like, if anything for that series, there was a broad outline of what was going to transpire, and everything else was just up in Hama's head, Yeah, but that was one of the titles that like we had to end. Like we weren't allowed to continue that one. Whereas World War III, America's Elite, we had promised 12 more issues, so that one continued.
In talking about the end of G.I. Joe, weren't you the guy the behind this Devil's Due team only super rare exclusive cover from 36?
Yeah. So this, it was. I was part of this team, but I'd say Mike O'Sullivan was the person that spearheaded it. So Mikey drew all the little background heads. Mark Powers drew the Colton up front, and then the little corner guy there is a little Blaylock done in grunt style, but this was done by Mike Baer. Yeah. So this issue, I was actually just talking to Blaylock about it. This issue was planned as a surprise for both the staff who had all worked on the book since we started, and friends at Hasbro to get some of these. And it was going to be given away at like a celebration, like sort of like a send-off to G.I. Joe. Like we were going to rent a space at a bar. I'm saying we're going to because we did not. We were going to like have a little party at a bar, like just down the block from the studio. And at the time, Devil's Due had a president, Blaylock, and we also had a CEO. This book, I didn't realize who it was, but this book was cleared by the CEO to go ahead and print it, and we were going to do this party, and he was the one that was okaying everything on my end to make this happen. I didn't know that until this After Action Report book came out. Blaylock texted me, he's like, "What is this book?" So for however many years from this being created until that book came out, I didn't remember which one of them okayed it, but the other one didn't find out about it. So the CEO said, "Yes, let's do it. Here's the book. Here's the money, whatever, like make it happen." And then because that party never happened, there's something there too. That party never happened because there was a split in the company between that CEO and Blaylock. There was a falling out. And the CEO left, and created that other company, like split off with that creative services company. And so there was a pretty bad like split down the middle of staff at Devil's Due. And so it was a rough time. Not only like did we lose the book, we had already lost staff, but then at this point, the company was kind of like cracked in a sense. It was a weird little divorce that happened. And then this book went into a closet. A couple copies got shipped out to people that like Mikey took care of, like that were on his list to get books out to. So like a couple Hasbro people and maybe like somebody that helped us with reference or something like that. So copies of this book leaked out for sure. And I can tell you that like this copy right here is for Blaylock because he still does not have this book. And like when he found out, he was like, "Can you find me one?" I was like, I think I have a couple.
Is the print run of this smaller than a sort of then usual Devil's Due store?
We did 50. 50 copies because that's all that was required. Yeah, it wasn't being sold.
Right.
It was just being handed out to people as a gift. And I think it's written in the after action report, but it succumbed to not only a flood in one of the Devil's Due studios, but also a fire at the warehouse that I had mentioned earlier.
So there are fewer than 50.
Absolutely. Like so, I'd say like maybe 15 to 20 copies that exist.
So this might be the rarest G.I. Joe comic book.
Yeah. That one outside of this, the one that I can discuss a little bit. So this is issue 2 of our first volume of G.I. Joe versus Transformers. And it's issue 2, as you can see up here in the corner, but probably can't see that well with my crappy camera. There we go. Number 2. And many people own this comic, but they own it as issue 3. And so this book...
this is a misprint.
Well, yes. It was ordered to be pulped.
Okay.
It was ordered to be pulped by Hasbro. So this was printed for the Transformers Collector Convention. I think like 2004, 2003. And the back cover ad did not sit well with Hasbro. This was one of our own titles at Devil's Due.
Too sexy.
Yeah. So when they got their printed copies, and like I said previously, not on this podcast, but I think maybe in that book, that I wasn't the publisher at the time, so I don't know how the printed copy is the first time they saw this ad. But when they got this ad in-house, they're like, "No, you can't do that." And luckily, it was just our convention cover, so we had time to reprint on the following issue and have it in time for the convention.
And that would have been what would a print run have been for a convention exclusive?
Man, I feel like...
Sorry, I keep asking you these number questions.
No, yeah. I feel like this would have been anywhere from
500 or 1,000?
500 to 1,000. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Right in there. So there's plenty of these with issue 3 on the cover, but there's only a handful out there with issue 2 that when it was ordered to be pulped, I still set copies aside for our archive at Devil's Due.
So do you remember anything G.I. Joe that was in development which now wasn't going to go forward because Devil's Due didn't get the license renewal?
Yeah, this is such a weird memory. I remember Mike O'Sullivan and I at the time coming up with a book that we wanted to run past Josh, and like, so we laid it out. We knew who we wanted to have write it, and we were going to ask our contact at Hasbro to write the first arc. So whoever the brand manager was for Joe at the time that we were going to for approvals, we were going to take this book to them and be like, "Do you want to write this Joe book for us?" We thought it was like home run, no problem. This is great. I remember walking into Blaylock's office with Mike and going to pitch this book, and Josh most likely having just hung up with Hasbro, getting the news that we weren't renewing the license. And he's like, I don't want to hear any of this. We were like, okay. Like, we didn't fully understand what was going on at the time, but I know the feeling in the room. I know the look he had, and I know that we did not get to pitch this book fully. But luckily, this book did come out, in a sense, from IDW on their tail end. It was the cartoon version of G.I. Joe, which I thought would be such a good idea to have somebody from Hasbro write the cartoon version. The book eventually did come out. It was the Saturday Morning Heroes book that IDW did.
A version of this concept did come out.
Yes. Yeah. So like when I saw that announced, I wasn't angry. I was like, thank God they finally did it. Like this has been sitting on the table for how long? You know?
Okay,
Like,
so
it should have happened.
you guys were about to pitch a Devil's Due comic based in the
Yeah.
animated '80s continuity.
Yep. Yeah.
I think you have said this next sentence indirectly, and I wanted to say it and sort of get your. So it sounds like. So you have said that in not getting the license renewal, Devil's Due became a smaller company. It went from maybe 12 people to 6 people, and it was publishing fewer books. So if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is you had this flagship comic, G.I. Joe, which was your best-selling comic, and with it came a bump from graphic novel collections and any spin-offs or special issues like exclusives for conventions or the website. And so Devil's Due, if you're used to selling like 20 or 22,000 copies of America's Elite, and that helps Devil's Due fund 3 or 5 or 10 other comics, right? Which also have to make their own money, but they're going to be selling it like 3,000 or 9,000 or 15,000.
Right.
Without G.I. Joe, the company cannot pay for as many employees and just does not have a big enough pipeline to make as many books. And so the company must contract because its biggest seller goes away.
Right. Yeah. And in that instance, a lot of people went from staff to like they were no longer staff or salary. They went to like a freelance or a vendor.
Okay.
The people that did want to stay on, there were people that said, nope, I'm good. I'm out, you know, and that's fair, you know, when the option is either, you know, you're now a vendor or you could walk. Some people walked.
All right. So you're at Devil's Due through the end of 2010. And you start with Kunoichi 8 months later in August of 2011. So do you remember a final week or a day for you at Devil's Due? I hear that there's a special shelf of toys that was in your office at Devil's Due.
Yeah, I have a photo of Josh using a minivan. I don't know if it was his van at the time or rental or whatever, but bringing this to my house from his studio basement where Devil's Due was set up at the time. Just a photo of this in the back of his van, leaving there. I hate this shelf now, by the way. Like it was made specifically for that cubicle, but
all right.
I
So
hate
what's your final month or week or day like at Devil's Due?
I think the thing that when I saw the writing on the wall was Comixology and our partner with Comixology, where they were like, oh, well, yeah, we want your entire back catalog of stuff digitized. And like at that point, we maybe were publishing like 2 titles through Diamond. And my main job at that point was changing all of our digital files to be what Comixology needed. And then looking at our server and going, well, there's X amount of books on this server. And me finally realizing like when I get to this end, I think that's the end for me, you know, like the books being published, you don't need one other person in the company, you know, and the company at that time was whatever freelance people were doing editorial and then the art and all that. I like how I just breeze over the creative part, all that stuff, all that art and crap. But you know, like Blaylock, me, whatever intern we still had at the time, and then vendor or freelance editorial, you know. So not doing that many books, it makes no sense for me to be sitting there anymore past digitizing those books that I did.
So what did you do for the next 8 months before you started with Kunoichi?
I don't think I've ever been asked that. Can you explain this gap in your resume?
Sorry, it sounds like I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to accuse you of anything. And if the answer is I just sat on the couch and like watched TV, like you had been at a job for 7 years, that is an excellent answer.
No,
sat on the couch.
I do want to like figure out how to form this meme for that question. Like, can you explain this gap in your resume? And just so that the person replying is like, oh, you want to know how to do it? You want to know how to not work? You know, like I can tell you.
I think you and Mark should go into business making mugs. Mark's is going to have this parabola and yours is going to say, can you explain this gap in your resume?
Yeah. Are we looking at LinkedIn? Is that?
Yeah.
I switched to selling stuff on eBay full time. Like I was going to thrift stores and picking up whatever I could find that I knew. Like I've always sold, like I mentioned earlier, my wife and I back in the late 90s, we'd go to toy shows and stuff and set up. So we had like a storage unit full of crap that we were always sort of eBaying. But then like when I didn't have Devil's Due, I was like, well, I'm just going to do this until I figure out what's next. And just sat on our back porch putting stuff on eBay all day, which
and
pretty fun.
Maybe you had some rare Devil's Due stuff to sell.
I did, but honestly, at that time, was not worth putting on eBay.
Right.
Yeah. I do remember I did let one of these number twos go at some point. I do remember that. That was at a JoeCon though. I remember selling one of those.
Okay, so going back to this sort of, so the second thing you said in this interview was like, oh, Devil's Due had this other company, Kunoichi, which was creative services, which did stuff for Hasbro. So I sort of understand what creative services is, and I sort of don't. So did Kunoichi started with that sort of schism, that divorce in Devil's Due, like around the time that or was it earlier?
It was much earlier.
Okay.
They were at the first offices that I was at, which was one of the places on Ravenswood. So that had to have been around 2005, 2000. Well, when did the 25th anniversary Joe's kick off? That was 2007. Yeah. So Kunoichi existed before that, but that was our first big like Hasbro role. Was working on a lot of the packaging. I'm looking up here because I have a lot of that stuff.
When you say packaging, you mean how the paper stuff is going to get printed, the actual card? You mean the plastic? Do you mean like layout of the figure?
The design.
The design.
Yes, the design. For 25th anniversary, it was mostly just supplying artwork. Later, we got into other products where we did everything. Like I think one of the biggest ones was the Stan Lee Spider-Man San Diego Comic-Con exclusive. It's just like a Spider-Man body, but it has Stan Lee's head, and like the whole box is just comic art. So like we were responsible for everything on that box, and that was like one of our first big pieces for them. But so Kunoichi, this is from my viewpoint. I didn't start the company. Like I said, the CEO at Devil's Due started this company. It just made sense because we had the relationship there with Hasbro. Like we already had the ends, and then we also had the relationship with this giant pool of artists, so it just made sense to come to them and be like, hey, we have this other service we can provide for you, and luckily it worked out quite a bit. I can say when that split happened, which was probably right at the end of World War III, around 2008, I was working for both companies at that point. When the split happened, I had to make a decision. I could no longer work for Kunoichi and Devil's Due just because of how bad that had been at the time. So I had to make my choice, and I was like, well, I'm gonna go with Devil's Due. That's why I'm here. And then however long, gap in your resume, sitting on my back porch selling eBay stuff, and then getting the call from Brian, who used to be my intern at Devil's Due, calling to hire me at Kunoichi. And they're like, hey, we want you to come on. And so what Kunoichi was a 4-person team outside of the person who owned it, the guy who created it. He wasn't really hands-on. He was just there to run the business. We were there to run the projects. But the 4 of us were all creative managers, like project managers, but like obviously more on the creative side because that's what the business is. So you just had 4 project managers sitting in a room running all these various projects and then pulling in all these artists. Like rarely was anybody in-house with us. Like all of the work was done remotely, supplied to us, and then we were on calls with Hasbro constantly.
And you're describing design and illustration. Are you also describing copywriting?
We didn't do too much copy, but one of the larger things when we moved out of packaging, like we were still doing packaging, but they started pulling on us more for internal pitches at Hasbro. So we did a lot of work for people building decks for pitches, that projects that never saw the light of day, like tons and tons of like, oh, we're going to reboot Mask now. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to put all these images together and Photoshop all these assets that you send us into something that like looks cool for Mask now. And most of our time working on internal pitches was getting an email from somebody saying like, hey, I'm walking from this part of Hasbro down the hall to the other part. Can you make these revisions on this deck and upload the new one by the time I get into that room for that meeting? And it's like, yep, that's what we're doing. Yeah, just a lot of last minute like uploading that stuff.
And when you say pitch deck, you mean like a slideshow, a PDF?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Stuff that they'd have their screen up, shared on whatever screen in the room, and be pitching it internally or just fine tuning whatever license they wanted to breathe life back into. There's a lot of pitches for, because the team we got moved to eventually was their whole deal was looking for future partnerships. Like, how can we integrate technology with partnerships with Hasbro? So there was a lot of us making fake like game app screens and stuff like that after a while.
I've heard you mention that or I've heard written somewhere that you worked on some of the file cards for G.I. Joe. Is that right? And is that connected to this Kanoichi operation?
I did not write on any file cards. No. Yeah, that might have just been something misled from the battle file stuff or the data desk.
And I've seen on Nerd Ratio this that you've spoken to them. Unfortunately, the podcast is no longer available, so I don't know what you said, but I think the focus was sort of talking about some of this G.I. Joe concept art from that kind of just post Venom versus Valor era.
I can tell you,
was that connected to all of that?
This wasn't for Kanoichi. No, this was just us getting stuff at Devil's Due to see what was coming up if we wanted to incorporate that in the books. And I can tell you most of the Nerd Ratio episode was me and them just going like, oh, this is cool. Because like I had no insight into like what this was. We had it supplied to us.
How involved was the relationship between Devil's Due and Hasbro to incorporate G.I. Joe product into the Devil's Due comic? And the reason why I ask is that it has one or two other people have described it as not very involved or not very active. And I sort of thought about it, and I'm like looking through some Devil's Due issues, like, well, there's that new helicopter and there's that new figure, but I compare that to maybe the hand gesture should be this, right? Marvel and Hasbro in the 80s and the television commercials. So can you talk about that back and forth?
So I'm going to echo that it was not like they weren't on us to do anything of the sort. However, when it did happen, it was more along the lines of like whatever artists or whoever seeing the new Joe stuff and being like, that's cool, I want to include that. It was also viewed as like sort of like a thank you from Hasbro, like thanks for putting in that new helicopter or whatever, like almost like you didn't have to do that, but like we appreciate that you did that. I remember a specific instance how involved we got in the barrel roll and all these guys, Blackout and barrel roll and then Bomb Strike, just because we were friends with Dwight. Like Dwight was one of our favorite people at Hasbro, and it was like, yeah, we're going to feature him all over the place. So he got top billing when we could,
Okay.
Yeah.
And can I ask about a specific example that we noticed that Chris Lai worked on the Arashikage Showdown mini manga digest with Josh Blaylock, and then went on to do a lot of the design work for Sigma 6, but then also did the comic book for Devil's Due. So was that a relationship between Hasbro just finding him, or was it a Devil's Due into Hasbro?
Did they just poach that guy?
Yeah, they yeah, but that's like go do the best thing you could do, which that would be working on the Sigma 6 stuff, Yeah, Chris has gone on to create his own studio, and it's doing phenomenal stuff to this day. Like it's amazing stuff. But yeah, Chris he most likely was an art intern at Devil's Due, if I'm remembering correctly. And then like once you find out that like, oh, you're already to a point where you could be working in the comics, that's immediately we're going to pull you over, like that's why he worked on the Tales of Arashikage and the Sigma 6 stuff.
And then can I guess what the next sentence might be? That for variety in one's resume, or for a different pay scale if one is drawing comics.
Sure.
But then a toy company
Mhm.
says, hey, do you want to do fewer designs for more money? Maybe you go to the toy company.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I believe this has happened on Transformers, where a couple artists who were doing work for Dreamwave on Transformers started doing box art or sort of interior art of Transformers at Hasbro, and then did a lot more of that. And it's sort of anonymous. You don't get to sign your name, but
Right.
that sort of more work or steadier work, or it pays better, or it's maybe it
Yeah,
pays the
and-
same but is easier because it's not, 1 page a day.
And I would assume that that's the goal, even if it's not like in the forefront of their mind. Like the goal is to move on to work like that versus the grunt work of what comics is. Like I have firsthand seen people get burned out drawing comics 40 hours a week. It can take a toll, So moving on to something like that it's more in the creative realm. I assume that's what you would want to move on to, Having no art inclinations myself, I can't really speak to that though.
So if Kunoichi was doing some GI Joe stuff for Hasbro for or after the 25th anniversary line, was that company involved in any of the pack-in comics that were coming with 2-packs or 3-packs of figures around that time?
They weren't, to my knowledge. I don't remember doing anything like that, and that could have been happening before I was fully involved with Kunoichi.
Okay.
What I do remember is when they did the comic pack, the Devil's Due comic pack. They
is this the
reprinted,
fan? Is this the fan voted?
The one with Scarlet or CoverGirl and Spirit on the cover.
Yeah.
They straight reprinted the issue without changing the logo, and that really bummed me out because that was when we were printing through Image. So the Devil's Due fan book or figures came out with the Image logo on it. I'm like, that.
Right, you were okay. You were no longer publishing through Image. Devil's Due was now its own company, and that Image logo should have been replaced with the Devil's Due logo.
Yeah. Because as of like issue 25, which was well before the 25th anniversary stuff, we had the Devil's Due logo on there.
Right.
Or 26, yeah. Yeah, that bummed me out personally. I'm assuming more than just me at Devil's Due, but
I'm sure Image appreciated the little advertisement in toy stores everywhere.
I doubt they ever noticed. Yeah.
Is there anything we've not talked to you or asked you about Devil's Due that we really should have by now?
No. Yeah, I feel like we touched on everything. There's this. I don't know if I've mentioned this recently or publicly anywhere.
The core.
Tell us about this. Remind our listeners and viewers what the core is, and talk about this deal, if you would.
Yeah, the core. That was always G.I. Joe's #1 knockoff or bootleg toy company. So like when your grandma went to the store and you were asking for G.I. Joe, she came back with the core because they were cheaper and they looked the same to her. But to most Joe collectors or Joe fans, not what we wanted.
And the company is Leonard.
Leonard, yeah. So after we lost the Joe license, this was sort of like our not FU, but like we still like this sort of storyline, and we know that this is there. We know that the Joe fans will understand, like they'll get it, like they'll get why we're doing this book. Unfortunately, issue number 1 never came out. This is issue 0. So the sales did not warrant an issue number 1. I know that it was written, some of it was probably drawn, but we never went past this issue 0. And clearly, right off the bat, we were like, okay, we're not with Hasbro anymore. We can do whatever we want. And Leonard was like, yeah, do it, go for it. So it was as much gore and nudity as we could get away with in a comic.
I'm gonna read the solicit, written by Rick Remender, drawn by Jason Phillips. In an age of super terrorism, no military force is better equipped to put global threats out of commission than the Corps. Even their toughest soldiers will be tested, however, when the organization known as the Marauders sets their sights on black hole machine capable of wiping out continents. Wow.
Yeah.
I can think of one
Man.
team that's better equipped.
I remember, so they sent us all of their like style guide stuff for the Corps, and it was when this new series was kicking off. Like they had finally jumped to what Hasbro tried with G.I. Joe in 2001, the non O-ring figures, which brought in like a whole new cast of characters to the Corps, and so they sent us their style guide for that. And I still, to this day, if someone says something about a ninja, I call them a Niha, because one of the character descriptions said he had Niha-like abilities. Like they misspelled the word ninja for his ninja-like abilities, and he was just a Niha. And I was like, all right, this dude's a Niha from now on.
I note that the Core issue 0 is released the same month as IDW's G.I. Joe issue 0.
Do you have the sales numbers on those?
I don't. I could try and find them, but if we know from you that there was no issue 1, I think we can guess a certain ceiling. Sam, I think you've already mentioned that you were reading the IDW G.I. Joe. So Can you talk about sort of now shifting from fan to professional back to fan? And G.I. Joe keeps chugging along sort of without you and the company where you were. So you read the IDW issues.
Yeah. So I don't know how long I stuck with it, and I can't tell you because I've since sold all of those off. Like I no longer have any of my IDW. I think I do still have however many issues of Cobra, like maybe that first miniseries with Chuckles, because again, that was like one of the best things I've ever read in the Joe world. I just know that like it died off after a certain point, and I just got sort of disillusioned with it, and I'm sure like I fell off when a lot of other people fell off, but every time they'd reboot with something cool and something special, I'd jump in for 1 or 2 issues and then just like, nah, this is not for me. I fully intend to skybound all the way, like I'm going to stick with images as far as I can. Cause I'm really excited about the shared universe and seeing where they're going to take it. I don't know. I've got high hopes for this new series.
And when the Cobra series was coming out, you were still in Devil's Due at that time, and you're bringing it into the office saying, "Look at this comic, isn't it great?"
Yeah. When the thing happened with Jinx, I was just like trying to get it in front of everyone's face, and they're just like, "We're trying to make our own books. Leave me alone." Yeah.
The sort of feeling a little bit sore maybe about some of that.
Yeah.
Cool. So then, what's the trajectory from all of that to then Toy de Jour and to present day?
Yeah. So Toy de Jour actually spawned out of Devil's Due, where believe it or not, I had like a ton of toys in my cubicle when I moved over to the position of assistant publisher. So we had these sort of like chest high walls around all the cubes. And I would bring in a toy like almost every day and just set it up on there for people to come over and be like, "Oh, what's the new toy today?" And it literally spawned from that, where
Right.
I created a website just to put my toys on it, and like a blog fashion, and it was like a review website, but it's all toys that I bought, so I love them all, and it's not really reviews, just like here's some cool shit I bought. So I had Toy de Jour forever, and then when Kunoichi was acquired by a large digital agency here in Chicago, we all moved over to like a project manager role, and slowly the Hasbro stuff switched from like fun packaging stuff to I was working with Motorola and Culligan, and I just was not digging working at a large agency at all. And this company only acquired Kunoichi so that they could acquire like the Hasbro logo and put it on their website of clients that they've worked with. So like I remember specifically the last San Diego Comic-Con box set that I worked on, the Joe versus Transformers one with the Jetfire on the cover and this Hound. That my team, when they were looking at the project and they looked at how much we got paid for doing these, they're like, this is not worth your time. Like, this is not projects we should be doing in this company. This company, I mean, that it was the fun shit, but it wasn't the stuff that they wanted to have in house. We did do a lot of Hasbro work where we moved into websites. Like when the new Furby launched that year, we did the Furby Boom website, which was like a huge project for us. We did a Nerf, like a heads-up display app for plugging your phone on top of a Nerf blaster and having a little readout, HOD or whatever, or HUD. We did that for Nerf and Rebel. So a lot of stuff just moved into the realm of websites and apps. And like, while it's still fun, it's still Hasbro work. It wasn't at all where I came from. And then as soon as I started getting yelled at about like spreadsheets for money on Culligan, I'm like, I'm out. And I asked Liz recently, I was like, I don't remember the conversation on what it was, because I know that I was having a terrible time at this company. And I know that it was you that said like, well, let's try to do the store. But I don't remember exactly how that went down. And I think that's all it was. It was like, I was miserable. And she was like, well, we've always talked about doing a retail space. So let's look for a space and see if we can find something cheap. And we did. That was 2014. And so March of next year will be our 10-year anniversary of the store.
Are you you open 7 days a week? Do you have employees?
Yeah, we're just closed on Mondays. We're open today, and Paul, who works for us over the weekend, he's been messaging me because he can't find something, and I'm like, I can't right now. I'm sorry,
Paul. We're so sorry.
Yeah.
I wonder if my store has been. I got a text. My store is fine.
Oh, good. Yeah. So it's mostly just Liz and I. Liz has another job now. She just started as a flight attendant this year, so she's not in all the time. But she's the one that, like, I have this really horrible problem where like people will sell us, like, say, a G.I. Joe collection, and I will immediately pull out like Claymore or whatever and show it off on the Instagram and sell that figure, and then the rest of the figures just go behind the counter in a box. And she's like, hey, we should put these out and sell them, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I guess. Like my downfall is just like finding that gold piece and showing it off and being like, job's done. And she's like, it's not the job, man.
And it looks like you sort of got a few cool things here and there.
Yeah.
Your Toy to Jour vintage toys, arts and farts.
Wow, there's a lot going on the D's supposed to. That's like the middle of the Toys R Us logo. There's a lot going on this image.
Yeah. So the people that have been with us for a while will understand everything here. But to show this to somebody right now and be like, yeah. So a few years ago, pre-pandemic, for Halloween, we changed our logo and everything to a Toy de Jour version of the Toys R Us logo. So like the last R in Jour was turned around and the DE was put in there in quote, which is great because like Toy de Jour is spelled wrong. Like it should be DU. But like, I love that I got to put the quotes around DE for the Toys R Us iteration of it. So like often you'll see the Toys R Us logo on things. Like right now it's on our door. Like we've kept it around a while. And the DE, I think, is our logo. Like if you look at our Instagram profile, that's the DE. But then the full name, like our full Christian name of the store, is Vintage Toys, Arts, and Farts, because we carry vintage items, which is like household stuff or like vintage artwork, or just like separating vintage from the toys. Like there's a comma there on purpose because we do more than just vintage toys. We do vintage clothing, like vintage household stuff. Then there's toys, which obviously we focus on vintage toys, but we do modern stuff, like I was probably before we started recording, but complaining about. Like we do modern stuff, like we do Marvel Legends and stuff like that. The art is because we do art shows a few times a year, almost like every other month-ish. And then the farts is just representing the novelty section that we do. We try to always keep in like the gag gifts and the novelty gifts there.
Your G.I. Joe candles are wild.
Oh, thanks. I remember the last JoeCon. That was that Chattanooga, right? I brought those down to sell, and I had them set up at a booth. And then I'm assuming you guys know, but I can't put this on you. You know Ben Conway?
Yes, Ben Conway, the mastermind behind the Skeletron Roboskull.
Yeah. Okay. So he's a huge Storm Shadow fan, and he bought the Storm Shadow candle. and the Storm Shadow candle has Storm Shadow holding this little scroll, and it says something along the lines of, oh man, it's a riddle, but it says something like when the tempest fails, the word shall mean something else. I don't know. It's a riddle that just means Storm Shadow is an anagram for Thomas Sword. And I don't know if that was intentional. Well, I do know it was not intentional, but just when I found out that you could spell the words Thomas Sword from Storm Shadow, I thought it was like one of the coolest things. So I just made a little hint to that. And at that last JoeCon, Ben bought the candle, and I told him about what that meant, and he like freaked out, and he's like, "I'm gonna go show it to Hama." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Let me know how it goes." And I had to leave that day. I didn't stay for Sunday, and I messaged him afterwards. He's like, "Dude, I was so excited," and he did not give a crap. And I was like, "Well, I'm glad you took that bullet and not me."
And yeah, you got some cool G.I. Joe themed posts or prints.
Yeah. Yeah. I did those a while ago. I did those early on at Toy de Jour. I haven't done any recently, but I did. I think this one in 1982 for the Joes, just accessory prints. Oh, I did the Renegades as well, Sauter's Renegades. Those were the 3 Joe prints that I did.
So you mentioned having the G.I. Joe creator signing event promoting After Action Report Volume 2 recently. Right. How was that sort of getting back in the kind of the G.I. Joe Devil's Due frame of mind and meeting with all those guys and sort of dredging up all of those memories?
It was super cool. Like Josh and Roger, they're great guys. I've known them forever. So it was great for them to come out and get to do this with us. They had a blast, and I'm really glad that it happened because like just them getting to like, and they do shows, they do shows all the time with this book, but like they were really happy to get to do an author signing, and I thought it was fantastic. And just to be able to provide them and what they do, and Blaylock, and unfortunately not Seeley because I think he had COVID that day or that weekend, however long, but just to provide them and give our Joe fans, like our Joe collectors that are regulars, an opportunity to come in and see something like this. It was pretty great.
Maybe when my book's out, I can do a thing at your store.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He said sheepishly.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark, Sam, I have run out of questions. What are you going to show us? What's the last cool thing?
It's literally not here, but this is just a printer mock for the cover to the hardback for Snake Eyes. And we hinted, so Sean Dove and I hinted to people on the message boards at the time. Wow, look at this. What? That's cool. It's 2 of them. Damn. We said we were going to hide, like this went down in history, but unfortunately it didn't actually happen. We said we were going to hide Snake Eyes' name in the hardback, and we did. So in the digital files, I think it's the credits page where there's like a nice tree, like a cherry blossom tree, and it's all the credits on like the first inside front cover stuff. In the little hill, we wrote his name, but when it printed, it was too dark to be seen against the black. So we were like, that's fine, because we shouldn't have been doing that anyway. Like, that was a joke that like we shouldn't have put in there. His name that we came up with in the office was Cecil Snakeblade McCool. And so that's what got printed in there.
Wow.
Yeah. And the McCool is just like Droopy McCool, the Star Wars dude.
Well, good news, bad news. Good news, it didn't really happen. So you didn't make that impression on G.I. Joe fandom. Bad news, someone is listening to this podcast and they might be somehow in charge of G.I. Joe in 10 or 20 years. And who knows if that name will show up somewhere in canon.
Yeah. I mean, somebody at Hasbro and I guess IDW have the digital files, or IDW did for reprints. So like it's there, it's in the digital file. So somebody wants to pop that forward.
Listeners, sometimes I encourage you to write emails previously to IDW, now to Skybound with your requests. I'm going to ask you not to email Skybound with any requests relating to that silly name that Sam just mentioned. We can let this one lie.
What's a name that you guys would allow for? I mean, obviously, never name him.
Well, Hama on Facebook, Hama has referred to the person who he met in Vietnam who Snake Eyes is sort of based on.
Mm-hmm.
And Hama has used that name and has said, I also don't know if this was this guy's real name, because a lot of people, you'd call them by their last name or like the city or town where they were from. So there is a first name, last name sort of floating out there, which is kind of a stand-in for Snake Eyes' name. But I think Hama's only typed it on social media, and it hasn't made it to any comics or toy packaging or anything. So for me, it's classified.
So that reasoning is the only reason you would allow that name, right? I mean, if somebody decided like if a Skybound author said like, well, this is the name now, would you have a problem with the name?
I think I prefer that Hama come up with it because the mythology is his. Yeah. But I also recognize that any one person who's writing G.I. Joe doesn't own G.I. Joe. Hasbro's the arbiter, and starting in a couple months, there'll be 2 different comics G.I. Joe continuities. And so if a Joshua Williamson wants, or a Robert Kirkman wants to come up with a name, then that's the name over here.
Gotcha. Yeah. I personally feel like that's probably why we went so stupid and silly with it, because we wouldn't accept any name,
Right. I would go a step further. If somehow your silly name had a visual, like it's like what he wore to senior prom in high school. That's when I would say to our listeners, like I would say to Mark, and the podcast sentence that launched 100 cosplays, or and here's the podcast episode that launched 100 action figure customizations.
Oh man, I mean, it would happen too. It would happen.
And as we wrap up, Sam, let's remind people where they can find you these days.
Yep, toydejour.com. All of our socials are at toydejour, TOYDEJOUR, spelled incorrectly.
This is a brick and mortar store in what part of Chicago?
We're in the Logan Square neighborhood in Chicago. Okay. And we're just off the highway for anybody that's scared of driving in a big city. Right off 9094 on Fullerton Avenue in Chicago.
Excellent. And Tim, can you remind people where people can find you when you're not talking to me and our guests about all things G.I. Joe?
Video essays on television and film at our YouTube channel, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book shop in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. And if you want to find more about Talking Joe, our website is talkingjoe.co.uk. That points you to all of the places where we are. So with all of that said and done, a big thanks to Sam for spending such a generous amount of time with us and delving into the Devil's Due history.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
With all that said and done, I think it's time to say that
nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.
Awesome. Bye.